I didn't think the moment my family finally broke would happen because of a wedding dress fitting. Not a funeral, not a screaming fight, not some dramatic confession shouted across a dinner table. It happened quietly. In the middle of my living room, with my engagement ring heavy on my finger, and my phone lighting up with messages that made my stomach drop. My twin brother was trying to steal my fiancé, and my parents were helping him. I'm 28 years old. I've spent my entire life being told I was the reasonable one, the understanding one, the daughter who should always give way because my brother, my twin, needed more attention. I learned early how to swallow disappointment, how to smile through unfairness, how to tell myself that love didn't need to be equal to be real. But this time the line wasn't just crossed, it was burned to the ground. My fiancé, Felix, stood across the room from me, his jaw tight, his phone in his hand, asking gently, "Do you want to see what he sent me?" I already knew, because my twin brother, Tristan, had been circling my life the way he always had, confident, charming, entitled, convinced that anything I had was something he deserved more, including the man I was about to marry. And the worst part? When I finally confronted my parents, when I showed them the messages, the lies, the manipulation, I wasn't met with shock or outrage. I was met with excuses. He didn't mean it like that. You're being too sensitive. He's just going through a hard time. I remember standing there, my hands shaking, thinking, if they can justify this, then they never chose me at all. This isn't just a story about jealousy, or rivalry, or even betrayal. It's about what happens when the golden child finally tries to take the one thing that was never supposed to be a competition, and what it cost him when the truth came out. Because by the time this was over, my brother lost more than his pride. He lost his place in my life. And my parents had to face a question they'd avoided for nearly 3 decades. I'm Harper Lane, 28, and for most of my life I've carried the quiet burden of being the other twin. Tristan and I are fraternal twins. Same birthday, same childhood photos, same family stories, but we were never treated like equals. From the outside, people saw the cute twin dynamic. Matching Halloween costumes, joint birthday cakes, 2 toddlers clinging to the same balloon string. Inside our house, though, there was always a crown, and it never sat on my head. Tristan was the kind of boy adults loved immediately. Bright smile, easy laugh, athletic, confident in a way that made people want to hand him things just because he asked. Our mom especially drank it in like sunlight. She'd watch him move through the world like he owned it, and you could almost see her pride swelling, as if his shine proved she'd done parenting right. Me, I was sweet, quiet, mature for my age, which is what people call you when they don't know what else to do with you. One of my earliest memories of the favoritism is stupidly small, but it still stings when I think about it. We were 7. Our grandfather had given me a tiny red Ferrari toy car before he passed away, one of those little die-cast ones that felt cool in your palm. It wasn't expensive, it wasn't rare, but it was his, and then it was mine. I kept it on my bedside table like it was a promise that I mattered to someone. One afternoon, I came into my room and found the Ferrari snapped in half. Tristan was sitting on the floor, legs crossed, looking almost bored. When I screamed, he barely flinched. "It was an accident," he said, shrugging. I ran to our parents, clutching the broken pieces with shaking hands. I can still remember the way my throat burned from crying. The way I thought, naively, that the evidence would speak for itself. Mom didn't even ask him what happened. She just sighed like I'd inconvenienced her. "Harper, you need to share better," she said. "You know Tristan doesn't always realize his strength." My dad, quiet, passive, always choosing the path of least conflict, didn't defend me. He just patted my shoulder like I was a stranger's child and said, "It's only a toy." Only. That was the first time I understood. In our house, my pain didn't count the way Tristan's comfort did. As we got older, it didn't soften. It sharpened. In middle school, I joined the debate team. It was the first thing that felt like mine. I worked for weeks, late nights at the kitchen table, highlighting notes, practicing speeches into the bathroom mirror while Tristan played video games in the next room. The night before my first competition, I fell asleep with my binder beside me like a security blanket. The next morning, my notes were ruined. Pages warped, ink smeared, my poster board soaked through. Tristan sauntered into the kitchen, eating cereal like nothing had happened. "Oops," he said. "Spilled water when I got a snack." And again, my parents believed him without hesitation. They didn't ask why he was in my things. They didn't ask why he didn't wake me. They didn't ask why oops always happened to me. Mom's reaction wasn't panic for my competition. It was irritation that I was upset. Harper, you'll figure it out, she said, already turning toward Tristan. Tristan, don't forget your science project. We should help you make it look nice. I went to that debate competition half prepared, throat tight, hands trembling when I spoke. I didn't win. I didn't even place. Tristan's science project, by the way, won a ribbon. By high school, the pattern was so ingrained it felt like gravity. Tristan didn't even hide it. He'd lean into the favoritism like it was his birthright. The worst example came when I had my first real crush, a girl in my grade named Raya. She was funny and sharp and kind in a way that made the world feel less heavy. I made the mistake of telling Tristan about her one night while we were brushing our teeth, like sisters sometimes do when they still want to believe in closeness. The very next day, I saw him in the hallway, shoulder against the lockers, laughing with Raya, his hand brushing her elbow like he'd known her forever. Within a week, they were dating. When I confronted him, he didn't even pretend to feel guilty. He grinned, eyes bright with victory, and said, "You snooze, you lose, sis." And my parents? They thought it was cute. They told me to be happy for him. I remember standing in my room that night, staring at my reflection, feeling something cold settle in my chest. This understanding that my family didn't just favor Tristan. They expected me to accept it. So I did what I'd always done. I swallowed it, and I started planning my escape. College was the first place I learned what my life could feel like without constantly being compared to my twin. I chose a university clear across the country, not because it was the best program, but because it was far enough away that Tristan couldn't casually drop into my orbit. I told my parents it was about opportunity. The truth was simpler. I needed air. Those 4 years were transformative in quiet, steady ways. I made friends who didn't know my family history, who didn't ask, "So which twin are you?" like it was a ranking system. I joined student organizations. I took leadership roles. I failed sometimes, and nobody rushed in to blame someone else or minimize my effort. I was allowed to exist on my own terms. During my sophomore year, I started therapy. I didn't even know how badly I needed it until a stranger asked me, calmly, "When did you learn your needs didn't matter?" That question cracked something open. Week by week, I unpacked years of being overlooked, of being told to be patient, to be understanding, to be the bigger person. I learned words for what I'd lived with: favoritism, emotional neglect, scapegoating. I learned that my resentment wasn't a personal flaw. It was a reaction to being consistently devalued. Most importantly, I learned boundaries. That I was allowed to say no. That love didn't require self-erasure. That I wasn't responsible for managing Tristan's ego or my parents' comfort. After graduation, I stayed in the city where I'd gone to school. I landed a solid job in marketing, rented my own apartment, and built a life that felt stable, mine. And that's where I met Felix. He was on the same project team, 30 minutes late to our first meeting, hair still damp from a rushed shower, apologizing to everyone like it actually mattered to him. He had this calm presence, like he listened not just to respond, but to understand. The kind of man who didn't take up space by force, but somehow filled the room anyway. I was drawn to him immediately and terrified by that fact. Old insecurities whispered in my ear, "Don't get your hopes up. Don't make yourself vulnerable. Don't compete again." But therapy had given me tools, so instead of retreating, I took a breath and asked him to coffee. He said yes. Our first date stretched into 3 hours, without either of us noticing the time. With Felix, I didn't feel like I had to perform. I didn't feel measured or ranked. I felt chosen. Consistently, quietly, fully. We've been together 3 years now. For the first 2, I kept him carefully separated from my family. I'd visit them alone during holidays, inventing excuses about his work schedule, his own family obligations. Felix never pushed. He knew enough of my history to understand that my hesitation wasn't about him. But when we started talking seriously about marriage, I knew I couldn't keep the walls up forever. So last Thanksgiving, I brought him home. I told myself people grow. I told myself my parents would behave. I told myself Tristan was an adult now, not the teenage boy who'd stolen my crush just to prove he could. The moment we walked through the door, I knew I'd been wrong. Tristan's eyes locked onto Felix like he'd just found a new toy. He was overly friendly in a way that made my skin crawl, hovering too close, touching Felix's arm when he laughed, interrupting me mid-sentence to redirect the conversation back to himself. Felix noticed it too. I could see it in the way his shoulders stiffened, in the polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. At dinner, Tristan regaled the table with stories from our childhood, carefully curated to make him look golden and me look incompetent. He talked about being the star athlete, conveniently forgetting that I'd been in band and debate, that I'd chosen different strengths. Our parents laughed along, oblivious or unwilling to see the discomfort etched into my face. After dessert, I stepped into the kitchen to grab more drinks. That's when I overheard Tristan's voice, low and confident, drifting from the living room. "You're too good for her," he was saying to Felix. "She's always been a little insecure. You deserve someone more on your level." My heart dropped into my stomach. I stepped back into the room just in time to see Felix pull away, his jaw tight. That night, when I confronted Tristan, he just smirked. "Relax," he said. "I always get what I want. It's just a matter of time before he figures out he picked the wrong twin." I went to bed shaking. And in the days that followed, the real problem began to surface. Because Tristan didn't stop. He escalated. After Thanksgiving, the unease didn't fade. It metastasized. At first, Tristan's behavior hid behind the thinnest veneer of plausibility. He started liking every single photo Felix posted on social media. Then came the comments. Inside jokes Felix didn't understand, compliments that felt oddly personal, little verbal hooks cast out like bait. When Felix ignored them, Tristan doubled down, sending messages framed as friendliness, but dripping with implication. I tried to convince myself it was just Tristan being Tristan, attention-seeking, competitive, incapable of respecting boundaries. But denial only works when the other person agrees to play along. Felix showed me the first text one evening while we were curled up on the couch, the glow from his phone cutting through the dim room. "I didn't want to worry you," he said carefully, "but this doesn't feel normal." The message was casual on the surface. "You ever wonder what your life would look like if you'd met the right lane twin first?" My chest tightened. More followed over the next few weeks. "Harper's always been sensitive. You deserve someone who can keep up with you. If you ever need a break from playing therapist, I'm here. Some connections are just inevitable." Felix never replied, not once. But silence didn't discourage Tristan. It energized him. The breaking point came the afternoon Tristan showed up at Felix's office with a bouquet of roses. Felix called me the moment it happened, his voice tight with controlled anger. "He said he was in the neighborhood," Felix told me. "He told my coworkers he was surprising someone special." I remember gripping my phone so hard my fingers went numb. Felix had told Tristan, clearly, directly, to stop contacting him, to respect our relationship, to back off. Tristan laughed it off, apparently, like it was a misunderstanding. "I'm just being friendly," he'd said. "You're reading into things." That night, Felix and I sat at our kitchen table, the roses lying abandoned in the trash can, petals already wilting. "I can't do this anymore," Felix said quietly. "Not because I doubt us, but because this is starting to feel unsafe. He's not hearing no." Hearing that, unsafe, was like ice water poured over me. This wasn't sibling rivalry, this wasn't immaturity. This was entitlement. So we decided to confront him together. We chose a public place, a small coffee shop near our apartment. Neutral. Controlled. Somewhere he couldn't twist the narrative into a private fantasy. Tristan was already there when we arrived, lounging in his chair like he owned the place. He stood immediately when he saw Felix, pulling him into a hug that lingered a beat too long. I felt my nails dig into my palms. I didn't let him play his games. I laid it out, calm, precise. Every example, every message, every crossed line. Felix spoke too, his voice steady but firm, telling Tristan directly that his behavior was unwanted, inappropriate, and damaging. Not just to our relationship, but to any chance of a healthy family dynamic in the future. Tristan listened. Then he laughed. "Oh, come on," he said, leaning back. "You really think he'd choose you over me?" The words hit like a slap. "I'm just giving him a better option," Tristan continued, eyes flicking to Felix. "We both know I've always been the better twin." I felt something inside me snap, but before I could speak, Felix stood. He looked Tristan straight in the eye and said, without raising his voice, "I've already chosen, and it's not you. It will never be you. Leave us alone." The smugness vanished. For the first time in my life, Tristan looked genuinely startled. We walked out without waiting for a response. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Because when people like Tristan don't get what they want, they don't reflect. They retaliate. 2 days later, we went to my parents' house. We wanted transparency. We wanted accountability. We wanted, maybe foolishly, for them to finally see the truth. Tristan had beaten us there, He sat beside my mother on the couch, arms slung casually over the back like a victorious general, already spinning his version of events. As soon as we sat down, my mom launched in. "What did you two do to your brother?" she demanded, eyes glossy with concern for him. I took a breath and explained, slowly, clearly, the messages, the office visit, the disrespect. My dad shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. My mom shook her head. "He's just being friendly," she insisted. "You've always been jealous of Tristan's confidence." My father finally spoke, his tone dismissive. "If your relationship is strong, you shouldn't feel threatened." Threatened, like Felix being harassed, was somehow a reflection of my insecurity. I looked at Tristan. He was smiling. That was the moment I realized something devastating. This wasn't about convincing them. They had already chosen. And if I didn't draw a line now, I would lose more than my engagement. I would lose myself. We left my parents' house in silence. The kind that presses against your ears, heavy and suffocating, like the air before a storm. Felix drove, his hands steady on the wheel, eyes fixed on the road. I stared out the window, watching familiar streets blur past, feeling like I'd just been ejected from a place I once called home. I didn't cry right away. Shock has a way of numbing everything. It wasn't until we were back in our apartment, door closed, keys dropped into the bowl, the ordinary sounds of our life returning, that my body caught up with what my mind had already processed. I sat down on the edge of the couch and finally let myself breathe. "They didn't even question him," I whispered. Felix knelt in front of me, taking my hands in his. "They didn't deserve the truth you offered them." I wanted to believe that. I really did. But grief isn't logical. I kept replaying the conversation in my head. Every dismissal, every excuse, every familiar phrase used to minimize my pain. It felt like being 7 years old again, holding a broken toy while being told I was overreacting. For the first time, though, I didn't turn that anger inward. I didn't ask myself what I could have done differently. Instead, I asked a question that terrified me. What happens if I stop trying to earn their approval? That night, Felix and I talked for hours. He told me everything Tristan had sent him, the full scope of it, not just the pieces I'd seen before, the manipulation, the subtle digs, the way Tristan tried to paint me as fragile, inferior, replaceable. Hearing it all laid out made something crystal clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a pattern, and I had been conditioned to tolerate it. Felix never blamed me, not once. He didn't suggest therapy because something was wrong with us. He suggested it because he wanted tools to protect us, not fix us. Still, I hesitated. Part of me was afraid that involving a third party would somehow validate my parents' narrative, that this was a me problem, that my sensitivity was the issue. I was scared Tristan would use it as ammunition. But another part of me, the part that had grown stronger over the years, knew avoidance was exactly what had allowed this to fester. So I did something I'd never done before. I stopped responding. To Tristan's messages, to my parents' guilt-laced calls, to the family group chat buzzing with vague comments about forgiveness and keeping the peace. The silence felt wrong at first, unnatural, like I was breaking an unspoken contract. But it also felt lighter. For the first time in my life, I wasn't explaining myself. I wasn't defending my boundaries. I was enforcing them. Felix supported every step. When I doubted myself, he reminded me that love didn't require endurance of abuse. When I felt guilty, he reminded me that consequences weren't punishments, they were outcomes. We decided to move forward with our wedding plans. Small, intimate, safe. Friends who had shown up for us. His family, who welcomed me without comparison or condition. And maybe, a few members of my family who were capable of respecting our relationship. Tristan was not on that list. We drafted a message together. Clear, factual, calm. No insults, no emotional pleas, just truth. We sent it to the family. In it, we explained Tristan's repeated boundary violations, his attempts to undermine our engagement, and our decision to uninvite him from the wedding to protect our peace. We made it clear this wasn't about revenge. It was about safety and respect. The fallout was immediate. My phone lit up like a warning siren. Calls, voicemails, texts filled with outrage, disbelief, and pressure. My mother sobbed about how heartless I was being. My father accused me of tearing the family apart. Aunts and uncles chimed in with concern thinly veiled as judgment. "Are you sure this is wise? Maybe postpone the wedding. Family should come first." But not one of them asked me how I felt. Not one of them asked Felix. That was when something inside me finally settled. Felicity, no, I wasn't overreacting. I was reacting appropriately to years of being pushed aside. And then, just when I thought the situation couldn't escalate further, Tristan showed up at our apartment, drunk, angry, desperate. He banged on our door close to midnight, shouting that Felix was his soulmate, that I was stealing what belonged to him. Neighbors opened their doors. Someone called the police. When officers arrived, Tristan was sitting on the hallway floor, crying, muttering about betrayal and lost love. They took him away to sober up. And the next morning, my parents called, not to ask if I was okay, but to tell me I should have let him in. That was the moment I stopped hoping they'd change, and started accepting that choosing myself meant losing them, at least for now. After the night Tristan was taken away by the police, everything accelerated. What had once been simmering beneath the surface boiled over into something public, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. The story was no longer confined to tense family dinners or private text messages. It had spilled into hallways, neighbors' conversations, whispered calls between relatives who suddenly felt entitled to weigh in. And still, my parents refused to look at the source of the fire. They framed the incident like a misunderstanding, a bad night, a moment where emotions ran too high. My mother said Tristan was heartbroken. My father said he was under pressure, and both of them looked at me like I was the one holding the match. Felix listened quietly when I relayed their words, his expression tight but controlled. "They're protecting the version of him they need to believe in," he said gently, "not the one that actually exists." We decided to stop engaging altogether. No more explanations, no more justifications, no more hoping clarity would magically fix what denial had been feeding for decades. We focused on the wedding. Security was hired, not because we wanted drama, but because we wanted peace. Saying that sentence out loud felt surreal. What kind of family situation required security at a wedding? Apparently mine. 2 days before the ceremony, my phone rang. It was my mother. She was crying so hard at first, I could barely understand her words. When she finally caught her breath, she told me Tristan had been in a car accident. He wasn't critically injured, she said, but he was hurt, shaken, in the hospital. And then came the ask. "Please," she begged, "postpone the wedding. Just a little. He needs you. We need you." I closed my eyes. For a moment, the weight of the past pressed in. The little girl who'd always been told to compromise, to wait, to be understanding. The daughter who'd learned that love meant sacrifice, even when it cut deep. Then I looked at Felix. He didn't interrupt. He didn't pressure. He simply waited. I asked myself a question I'd never allowed before. If this were anyone else, anyone not tied to me by blood, would I be expected to put my life on hold for them? The answer was clear. We sent flowers to the hospital. We wished Tristan a full recovery. But we did not postpone the wedding. The ceremony was beautiful, not because it was elaborate, but because it was honest. Felix stood across from me, eyes steady, voice sure. When he said his vows, I felt anchored in a way I never had before, not rescued, not overshadowed, but chosen. My parents attended. They sat stiffly in the front row, clapping politely, leaving early. Their smiles never quite reached their eyes. I knew they were already thinking about Tristan, already framing the day as something I'd taken from him rather than something I'd built for myself. As we were preparing to leave for our honeymoon, my father approached me. He handed me an envelope. "It's from your brother," he said quietly. Inside was a handwritten note. "Congratulations. I'm sorry for everything. I hope one day you can forgive me." I didn't know what to feel. Hope? Suspicion? Grief for all the apologies that had never come before? On our honeymoon, Felix and I talked about it endlessly. About whether this was real, whether change was possible, whether reconciliation meant reopening old wounds. When we returned, the truth surfaced on its own. Tristan had checked himself into rehab. The explanation unfolded slowly, piece by piece. Alcohol addiction. Years of spiraling insecurity masked by charm and entitlement. Pressure to be perfect. Fear of losing his status as the golden child. When we met him weeks later, he looked different. Smaller, quieter, stripped of bravado. He apologized, to both of us. Took responsibility, didn't deflect. For the first time in my life, Tristan wasn't asking for something. He was acknowledging what he'd taken. My parents, confronted with the undeniable reality of his behavior, finally cracked. They admitted, tearfully, awkwardly, that they had enabled him, that they'd confused favoritism with love. It wasn't redemption, but it was a start. We set boundaries, clear ones. Slow contact, no entitlement, no rewriting the past. accountability before access. Tristan accepted them. My parents struggled, but complied. And something unexpected happened. Without Tristan dominating every interaction, without my parents rushing to protect him, the emotional landscape shifted. Conversations became quieter, less performative, more real. The escalation had reached its peak, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't being crushed beneath it. I was standing. People think the darkest moment is the explosion, the screaming, the police lights, the public humiliation. They're wrong. The darkest moment comes after the adrenaline fades, after the decisions are made, after there's nothing left to do but sit with what you've lost. For me, it happened a few weeks after the wedding, on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Felix was in the shower. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I was folding laundry, our laundry, when I found an old t-shirt at the bottom of the basket, one I hadn't seen in years. My college sweatshirt, stretched thin, the logo cracked from too many washes. It still smelled faintly like my parents' house. I sat down on the edge of the bed and just stopped. That's when it hit me. I hadn't just lost a brother I couldn't trust. I'd lost the illusion that my parents would ever protect me the way they protected him. And no apology, no matter how sincere, could give that back. The grief came in waves. Not dramatic, cinematic sobbing. Just this quiet, hollow ache in my chest that made it hard to breathe some mornings. I'd wake up and forget, for a split second, that everything had changed. Then it would rush back in. The police lights, the excuses, the years of being second. Felix noticed before I admitted it. "You don't have to be strong all the time," he said one night, pulling me into his arms when my answers started getting shorter. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask why I was always the one expected to be resilient, why being strong had been my assigned role since childhood, why no one ever told Tristan to be smaller, quieter, more accommodating. Instead, I cried. I cried for the little girl whose toy was broken and dismissed, for the teenager whose crush was stolen and mocked, for the adult woman who almost postponed her wedding because she'd been trained to prioritize everyone else. I questioned everything. Was I cruel for uninviting my own brother? Was I selfish for not postponing the wedding? Was I heartless for choosing peace over reconciliation? These questions crept in late at night, whispering in my ear like familiar lies. And then came the guilt. Tristan was in rehab. My parents were struggling. Extended family whispered about how sad everything was. I was happy. That contrast felt almost unbearable. How could I be building a life while the family I came from was unraveling? One afternoon, my mother called. Her voice was softer than I'd heard it in years. She told me the house felt empty, that she missed me, that she wished things could go back to how they were. I almost laughed. How they were had never worked for me. After we hung up, I sat on the couch and stared at the wall, my wedding ring catching the light. That's when I realized something terrifying. If I went back, if I softened my boundaries, if I rushed to comfort them, I would be erasing myself all over again. The darkness wasn't loneliness. It was temptation. The temptation to shrink, to forgive too fast, to reconnect without accountability, to choose familiarity over self-respect. That night, Felix found me sitting in the dark. "I don't want to lose them," I said quietly, "but I don't want to lose myself either." He didn't rush to reassure me. He didn't tell me everything would be okay. He just said, "Then don't trade one for the other." That sentence stayed with me. The next morning, I made a decision, not a dramatic one, but a firm one. I would let myself grieve, but I would not retreat. And for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that choosing myself wasn't cruelty. It was survival. The turning point didn't arrive with fireworks or a confrontation. It came quietly, in the form of consistency. Weeks passed, then months. And for the first time in my life, the chaos didn't return. Tristan stayed in rehab. He didn't demand forgiveness. He didn't send manipulative messages or vague apologies fishing for reassurance. When he did reach out, it was through short, respectful updates, relayed through my parents at first, then directly, always asking if I was open to hearing from him, never assuming access. That alone was new. My parents struggled, but they didn't push. They asked before calling. They stopped speaking for me. They didn't defend Tristan when I mentioned past harm. The change wasn't perfect or complete, but it was visible, uneasy, earned. The real shift, though, happened inside me. I noticed it one afternoon while sitting in a cafe, watching Felix across the table as he talked about apartment listings for next spring. He was animated, hopeful, building a future with me, not around my family, not despite them, but independent of their approval. And instead of fear, I felt grounded. I realized I wasn't bracing for impact anymore. No waiting for the next betrayal. No rehearsing explanations in my head. No shrinking my joy to avoid provoking resentment. That was the moment I understood. The power had shifted. Not because Tristan apologized. Not because my parents finally saw the light. But because I no longer needed their validation to move forward. A few weeks later, Tristan asked if we could meet. Not privately, not dramatically. For coffee, in public, with Felix welcome to attend. That alone told me he was serious. When we sat down, he looked at me, not past me, not over me, not like I was something he could outshine. He looked uncertain. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. I just wanted to say out loud that I was wrong, not confused, not pressured, wrong. He didn't blame alcohol. He didn't blame our parents. He named his entitlement, his jealousy, his need to win. I didn't see you as a person, he admitted quietly. I saw you as a mirror I had to outperform. The words hurt, but they were honest. I didn't forgive him that day, but I believed him. That was enough. Later, my parents invited us to dinner. They apologized, not with grand speeches, but with specifics. Moments they should have intervened. Times they dismissed my feelings. Patterns they pretended not to see. My mother cried. My father didn't, but his voice shook. We thought we were keeping the peace, he said. We didn't realize we were choosing him. I didn't rush to comfort them. I let the truth sit. Because this time, I wasn't the one absorbing the discomfort. They were. And that's when I knew this wasn't temporary change. This was accountability. The turning point wasn't reconciliation. It was balance. I could love my family without sacrificing myself. I could allow space without punishment. I could move forward without erasing the past. Felix squeezed my hand under the table, grounding me in the present. Later that night, as we walked home, he asked quietly, "How do you feel?" I thought about it for a long moment. "Free," I said, and I meant it. The fallout didn't come all at once. It unfolded in layers, quiet consequences replacing loud conflict, truth settling where denial had once lived. Tristan didn't lose everything in a single dramatic collapse. What he lost was far more devastating to someone like him. His narrative. For most of his life, Tristan had been protected by a story, one my parents helped write. He was the gifted twin, the misunderstood one, the boy whose mistakes were just phases. That story had cushioned every fall, rewritten every misstep. Rehab stripped that away. When he returned, thinner and subdued, people noticed. Friends who'd once laughed off his arrogance now kept their distance. Family members who'd accepted his version of events started asking questions. And for the first time, Tristan couldn't redirect the blame. He couldn't say I was jealous. He couldn't say I was dramatic. He couldn't say I misunderstood. Because too many people had seen the truth. Neighbors remembered the night the police came. Relatives had read the message uninviting him from the wedding, and then watched the situation play out exactly as described. My parents stopped defending him automatically, which quietly rewrote the family dynamic in ways no one could ignore. Tristan had to sit with that. He lost the unspoken privilege of always being believed first. At work, things shifted too. He'd always relied on charm to smooth over mistakes, but now that charm felt brittle. People noticed his volatility, his tendency to cross boundaries, his need to dominate conversations. When accountability followed him into professional spaces, he struggled. He didn't get fired, but he stopped advancing. And for someone who'd built his identity on always being ahead, that stung. My parents faced their own reckoning. Friends asked why I hadn't invited my brother to the wedding. Extended family, emboldened by distance from the drama, asked uncomfortable questions. For the first time, my parents didn't deflect. They said, "We handled things wrong." That admission, small, imperfect, but public, changed how people saw them. Not as villains, but as people who'd failed and were now learning how not to repeat it. As for me, I didn't retaliate. I didn't gloat. I didn't share screenshots or stories. I didn't correct every misconception. I stepped back, and in doing so, I let the truth speak for itself. Friends noticed the difference in me. I stopped apologizing for existing, stopped softening my opinions, stopped asking permission to take up space. When people asked about my family, I spoke calmly, honestly, without bitterness. And something unexpected happened. They listened. The power imbalance that had defined my childhood finally collapsed, not because I fought harder, but because I stopped playing the role that sustained it. Felix watched it all with quiet pride. One night, months later, we sat on our balcony, city lights blinking below us. I used to think winning meant being chosen, I told him. By them, by my parents. He shook his head gently. Winning is knowing you don't have to compete anymore. Tristan tried to rebuild his life, slowly, unevenly, with effort. Some days I could see the old patterns twitch beneath the surface, the need for validation, the instinct to dominate. But now, when those moments surfaced, they were met with boundaries instead of indulgence. And that made all the difference. The fallout wasn't explosive. It was humbling. For everyone involved. I used to believe that family was something you endured. That love meant patience without limits. That loyalty meant silence. That being the good daughter meant making myself smaller so others could stay comfortable. I was wrong. What this experience taught me, slowly, painfully, is that real love doesn't require self-betrayal. It doesn't ask you to accept disrespect just because it comes wrapped in familiar faces. And it certainly doesn't demand that you sacrifice your future to preserve someone else's ego. My brother tried to take something that was never his to claim. My parents tried to pretend it wasn't happening. And for the first time in my life, I chose not to absorb the damage. Felix and I are building a life rooted in mutual respect. Not competition, not comparison, not control. We choose each other every day, not because it's easy, but because it's honest. My relationship with my family isn't perfect now, but it's real. Boundaries didn't destroy it, they revealed it. Tristan is still learning. My parents are still unlearning. And I'm still healing parts of myself that were shaped by years of being second. But here's the truth, I wish I'd known sooner. You don't owe anyone access to your life just because they share your blood. You don't have to stay silent to keep the peace. And choosing yourself isn't cruelty, it's clarity. Sometimes the golden child loses the spotlight not because you took it from them, but because you finally stepped out of the shadows. And when you do, you realize you were never meant to compete. You were meant to live.